Picture Lowell, Massachusetts in the 1840s with brick mill buildings that rose beside the Merrimack River and the windows glowing before sunrise, and inside, a farm girl from Maine or New Hampshire or Vermont standing at a loom for 12 hours while the machinery roars around her. And then picture that same girl after dark, leaving the mill, crossing back to her boarding house and attending a lecture by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and then sitting by lamplight and writing a poem. And she might publish that poem in a magazine that was written entirely by women like her, a magazine read across New England and noticed as far away as Europe. This is the story of the Lowell Mill Girls. They were farm daughters who left home, entered the city, and widened the possibilities of womanhood in America. It's also the story of what happened when those same women began to ask for more and became more expensive than the system wanted them to be. Both of these things are true, and the power of this story is that it refuses to let go of either one. I've always known that at some point I would write about the Lowell Mill Girls in one of my books. I'm doing that now, so they've been on my mind a lot. In my fictional story, one of my main characters was a Lowell Mill girl. She uses what she learned from that time in her life to help her niece, who has been widowed and has to take over the running of her late husband's mill. I'll drop a link in the description when the book is published. It's called Widow Foster's Ledger. Now, in the 1820s, company agents began appearing in rural villages of New England. They traveled through Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont and western Massachusetts with a proposition aimed at the daughters of farm families. Come to Lowell, work in the textile mills, earn wages you have never earned before, roughly $3 to $4 a week, more than most women could make anywhere else. Live in supervised company boarding houses, see mom and dad, it's perfectly safe. Attend lectures and evening classes, join circulating libraries and improvement circles. Step into a world your farm could not offer. Come for a few years, earn money, go home changed. Well, the pitch worked. By 1840, Lowell's textile mills employed more than 8,000 workers, and women made up nearly three-quarters of the workforce. Most were between 15 and 35. They were daughters of farmers from across rural New England who packed their belongings into bandboxes. If they were lucky, one of Hannah Davis's beautiful wooden boxes from Jaffrey, New Hampshire. There'll be a video about that coming. And they boarded the coach south. Now, they came for many reasons. Some hoped to help a brother pay for college. Some wanted to send money home to their struggling families. Some were drawn by the novelty of earning their own wages and spending them as they saw fit. Some came for the books. Now, Harriet Hanson Robinson, who began working in the mills at the age of 10, later wrote that the fame of the circulating libraries both drew them and kept them. I have to say, I would be drawn to that too. But others came for reasons they didn't speak of openly. Robinson wrote about women who worked in the mills under assumed names so that their whereabouts would be hidden from husbands who had the legal right to claim their wages. For those women, Lowell was not just a job, it was a refuge. Now, the promise was real, so were the hardships. A mill girl might spend 12 to 14 hours a day at a power loom surrounded by machinery so loud it filled the body as much as the room. Cotton lint drifted through the air and settled in the lungs, and it contributed to respiratory problems long after the workers left the mills. In the summer, the windows stayed closed to keep the humidity high enough that threads would not break, turning the rooms hot and breathless. And in winter, those same windows were often nailed shut. The boarding houses were crowded, with as many as 40 women in a single house and 6 sharing one room, sometimes sharing beds. Boarding house keepers were expected to enforce strict moral rules, curfews, church attendance, and proper conduct. Mill owners described the arrangement as paternalistic. I know, ladies, right? They said they were responsible for these young women and they had promised their parents as much. The wages were better than almost anything else available to women in 1830, though still roughly half what men earned in the mills. I know. And yet, after the long day ended, after the roar of the machines and the cotton lint and the heat, the boarding house supper, the evenings opened before them. They attended lectures. Ralph Waldo Emerson came to Lowell and delivered a lecture series for the factory workers. Edgar Allan Poe visited. John Greenleaf Whittier, the abolitionist poet, worked in Lowell for a time as a newspaper editor, and he wrote about what he found there. The English sociologist and feminist Harriet Martineau toured the mills with Emerson and was astonished by what the women had made of their evenings. They read. They formed book clubs and reading circles. They attended night school to study subjects such as drawing and German. They gathered in improvement circles to discuss literature, ideas, and the world beyond their looms. And then in 1840, they did something else astonishing. They started a magazine. The Lowell Offering was a monthly literary periodical, and its masthead carried a line that still stops you short when you think about the time in which they lived, wholly written by females employed in the mills. This was not a dry sheet of factory reports, and it wasn't simply management propaganda. It published poetry, fiction, essays, social commentary, literary criticism. It published romantic sketches of the New England countryside and realistic stories from the factory floor. The same women who spent their days at the looms wrote these pieces at desks in crowded boarding house rooms. Its key writers included Lucy Larcom, who would later publish the celebrated memoir, A New England Girlhood, a book I have consulted many times when I'm doing research. Harriet Farley, who left her family in Atkinson, New Hampshire, against their wishes because Lowell gave her the freedom to read, think, and write in ways that the farm never had. And Harriet Hanson Robinson, who had begun working in the mills at the age of 10 and was writing for the offering while still in her mid-teens. 70 women contributed to the offering over its 5-year run. Many used pen names. All were workers and all were writing in the hours between supper and sleep. Charles Dickens visited Lowell in 1842 during his first American tour, and he was astonished. In American Notes, he wrote about the circulating libraries, the pianos in the boarding houses, the lectures, and the offering, which he called a periodical of high literary merit that compared advantageously with many English annuals. It's still remarkable. Farm girls from Maine and New Hampshire publishing a magazine that Charles Dickens judged favorably against respected literary publications in England. But every bright story casts a shadow, and this one is no exception. The Lowell Offering was celebrated not only by workers, but also by mill owners. They liked what it represented and how it could be used. It portrayed Lowell as a place of dignity and opportunity, which it was, without equally portraying it as a place of exploitation, which it also was. Direct criticism of the mills appeared only rarely. In that sense, the magazine became, at least in part, a public relations vehicle for the Lowell system. Sarah Bagley saw the shadow clearly. She came to Lowell from Candia, New Hampshire in 1837, and she understood both what the offering was and what it left unsaid. The hours were too long, 12 to 14 hours a day. Wages were falling. The speed up, assigning more machines to each worker without more pay, was wearing women down. The offering was not saying those things loudly enough. She tried to publish her most critical pieces in the magazine, but they were refused. So she built another platform. On December 28th, in 1844, Sarah Bagley founded the Lowell Female Labor Reform Association and became its first president. She organized petitions that gathered more than 2,000 signatures from female workers demanding a 10-hour workday instead of the 12 to 14 that they were working. She testified before the Massachusetts legislature in 1845. The bill failed, but she kept organizing, and she later became the editor of the Voice of Industry, a labor newspaper willing to say what the Offering would not. Bagley's often described as one of the first major female labor leaders in the United States. She came to Lowell from Candia, New Hampshire at about 31, and she organized women who were exhausted, underpaid, and running out of patience. Girl, she did it loudly. She did it publicly, and she did it at a time when women were not expected to do either. In November 1850, Sarah married James Durno, a homeopathic physician and medicine seller. For several years in Albany, she practiced as a rheumatic physician herself, an unusual public role for a married woman at the time. During the 1850s, the Durnos moved to Brooklyn, where they started a business producing what they called snuff for catarrh that was marketed as a remedy for cold-like symptoms. After James died, Sarah traveled before eventually returning to Philadelphia, and she died there in 1889 and was buried with family at Laurel Hill Cemetery. Now, when Charles Dickens toured Lowell in 1842, he saw the pianos, the libraries, and the offering. He was genuinely moved and astonished, and he wrote about the city with warmth and admiration. What he saw was real, but what he missed was real too. Dickens visited during a brief moment when the Lowell system still operated close to its founding ideals. Within a few years, wages fell further, hours were lengthened, and the speed up intensified. The Yankee farm daughters who had come for opportunity began to leave because they had options, because they were educated and organized, because they had savings, and because they knew their own worth. So the mill owners replaced them. By the mid-1840s, Irish immigrants were arriving in Massachusetts, fleeing the potato famine that was devastating families at home. Many were desperate. Many were willing to work for less. And unlike the Yankee Mill Girls, they had not spent years building leverage through literacy, organizing, and community. The mill owners hired them. And by the 1850s and 1860s, Irish workers made up a growing share of Lowell's textile workforce. And then after the Civil War, French Canadian immigrants arrived as well. Slowly, the circulating libraries, the evening lectures, and the improvement circles faded. The Lowell Offering stopped publishing in 1845. The boarding houses changed. The culture changed. The distinctive world of the Yankee mill girl, the farm daughter who came to Lowell for wages, education, and independence, and who stayed long enough to write poetry and organize strikes, lasted only about 25 years. Then the mill owners found workers who cost less and asked for less and had fewer ways to resist. The experiment ended, but the Lowell Mill Girls did not disappear with the world they helped create. Harriet Hanson Robinson left the mills and became an abolitionist, a suffragist, and a writer. At the age of 73, she published Loom and Spindle, one of the essential firsthand accounts of mill girl life, because she wanted the world to know what she had seen. It's an excellent resource book for someone like me who writes a lot about that period of time. Lucy Larcom published A New England Girlhood in 1889, a memoir of poems and essays and recollections of the mill and the looms and the evenings of writing. It remains one of the great memoirs of the 19th century, written by a woman who had tended a loom in Lowell as a child. The labor movement that Sarah Bagley helped build, the 10-hour movement, the Female Labor Reform Association, the petition campaigns, and the legislative testimony belongs to the larger struggle for shorter hours, safer workplaces, and fairer labor laws, a struggle later associated with another New England girl, Frances Perkins, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the 40-hour work week that many Americans take for granted today. Those farm girls who left home and entered the mills, organized, wrote, and demanded more, became part of a long line that runs through the Triangle Fire, Frances Perkins, and the New Deal, all the way to the workplace laws that still shape America today. The Merrimack River still runs through Lowell, Massachusetts. The brick mill buildings still stand. Lowell National Historical Park preserves the rooms where the mill girls worked, the streets where they walked, and the boarding house world where they read, argued, wrote, and dreamed. It's a great place to visit to learn more about the mill girls and that whole period of time in New England history. The girls came from farms and they went home changed. They carried new fashions, new books, and new ideas back to rural communities that had never seen anything like them. Many married later than other women of their era. Some never returned to farm life at all because they had seen something larger. Harriet Farley left Atkinson, New Hampshire in 1838 against her family's wishes because Lowell offered her the freedom to read, think, and write without restraint. Lucy Larcom tended her loom and wrote her poems. Harriet Hanson Robinson began work at the age of 10 and left behind her memoirs at 73. Sarah Bagley helped organize one of America's first major women's labor reform organizations and then went on to become a practicing physician. They were farm girls far from home and they changed everything they touched and they left a lasting record of their time in Lowell. New England's farm girls changing the world. It's just another day in New England's rich history. Now I can see myself there, a rural girl from Maine pulled towards the promise of circulating libraries and lectures and a chance to write. Now, how about you? Do you think you would have left home for a chance like that? I'd love to know what you think. And I'll drop some links in the description in case you want to learn more about these fascinating young women. And I will see you again somewhere in time.